So thank you very much for coming. Our organization is about trying to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. Many of you know the work that we do with green electricity, electric cars, promoting energy efficiency, all those things. Roughly 15 years ago, I can remember being at a conference where people were talking about microgrids, and it sounded very wishful at the time because of the cost of solar and storage really was not a thing. Most of my lifetime, it was said you could not store electricity. So here we are now in 2018. Those things have changed, right? The cost of solar and other renewables has gone way down. The cost of storage has gone way down. We all know that because of the electric vehicles. Now you can get storage put into your house. You can. Boston Globe today talks about you can get a unit for $1,000 now. And so the opportunities to put these things together are developing very rapidly, faster than I can keep up. And so we're a nonprofit organization. We try to work with other nonprofits and government and industry. And so we know some people who know more about microgrids than we do at People's Power and Light. So that would be Jeannie Ramey and Jen Stevenson from a nonprofit called Climbable, which is based in Boston. Massachusetts has some programming around storage and microgrids that isn't quite here yet in Rhode Island. We'd like to see that happen. And so there's some projects that they're involved with in Massachusetts that are providing some signals to us here. And I think we're going to learn a lot from Jeannie and Jen, and it'd be nice if we could think about ways of making something happen in this realm in Rhode Island. And I just happen to know that there's people in this room that would be pretty good partners with you all if you wanted to think about a way to get a project done. So with that, I just want to thank you for coming. I wanted to say I think we've got some excellent presenters here, and you may want to have people go around the room and introduce themselves. But now, off to Jeannie and Jen. So thank you.
So thanks everyone for coming. Maybe we can go around the room really quickly because we are a relatively small group. But we are a woman-run nonprofit based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we basically work to communicate climate science and clean tech issues. We try to make them understandable and actionable for all audiences, and it was basically born out of the need. Jeannie also works at Synapse Energy Economics, which produces really rigorous technical work based on science and math, and the numbers are there, and such good content, but it's not exactly digestible for everyone. So that's kind of how Climbable came into existence. And we work through our podcast, our blog, and our projects to make actionable projects for our communities. And our microgrids are one portion of that. So I'm the Director of Research and Operations, and maybe we can just go real quick and go through our names and organizations.
I'm Jeannie Ramey. I'm the Executive Director of Climbable, and thank you, Larry, for the introduction. And we're just excited to be here and meet everyone and share what we think and hear what you think. So.
I'm Andrew Grandall. I do communications and content creation for Climbable. I do the podcast, which is what we're recording right now. And yeah, it's amazing to be a part of it. I'm excited to learn about microgrids because it's very special to know. So
basically, why we're all here, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the genesis of our microgrid program. Jeannie was talking with someone who actually couldn't be here today, Dave Dayton from the Clean Energy Solutions Inc. and Frank Cummings from Peregrine Energy Consulting. And they came up with this idea of a resilient urban neighborhood, and the idea was that everyone should have access to clean energy, and they kind of came up with this microgrid for the low to moderate income communities. And we actually just partnered with the Green Justice Coalition, a group of environmental justice nonprofits in Massachusetts, to bring the community piece so that we had the technical side and the community side, and we formed RUN GJC. So RUN is Resilient Urban Neighborhoods, and GJC is Green Justice Coalition. And together we've been working for almost 2 years, and we recently received funding from the Mass Clean Energy Center to do feasibility studies with 2 of our partner organizations in Chelsea and Chinatown for microgrids. So that's pretty exciting. At the same time, we came to Rhode Island because we feel that the conditions here are perfect for this type of a design, and as such, we formed a bigger group, the Climbable Consortium, which is 10 organizations with the technical expertise that could bring a microgrid to fruition here. And we actually have some people. John is Clean Water Action, so Alex and John are here. Julie from POA and Kristen from CABA, they're all some of our partners in this program that we're pretty excited about. So I just wanted to get a rough idea of where everyone's coming from. The introductions were very helpful. Have people heard of the Power Sector Transformation Report? Can we get a show of hands? A lot of people, all right. Anyone read it or willing to summarize it for us? So,
We could try.
you want to?
So some of you may know that a few months ago, the administration put together some folks to think towards the future for the electric and gas utility, and they called it a power sector transformation effort, sort of trying to give a signal to National Grid to come in with proposals that would take us to new technologies and new ways of dealing with business models and markets, things like advanced metering infrastructure, things like electric vehicles, things like storage, more distributed energy resources, and all that. And so lo and behold, National Grid came in with a rate case split up sort of into two parts, docket number 4770 and docket number 4780. A lot of the interesting stuff is in docket 4780. We're an intervener. We're intervening in partnership with National Sierra Club and National Resources Defense Council. We're working very closely with the Conservation Law Foundation, trying to get everybody, moving towards the future as quickly as we can with the right technologies, the right business models. It's ongoing. If you want more information, you can contact Kat. We're working on that. It's going to go on for the next few months. It's the kind of place where things like microgrids should be developed from. Little quick thing here is not quite sure that either the administration or National Grid are quite getting the idea of how you really transform the power sector. We're trying to nudge them, give them a little bit more confidence, a little bit more inspiration on that. And so I think both of the administration and National Grid seem to be trying to feel each other out, like, where should we go with this? And I think, we're going to try to get them to be more ambitious.
So, thank you for summarizing that for me. That was better than I wrote it. And that's actually a great segue into my next slide, which is the existing grid, the macrogrid, which is, just to give a very quick overview, it's generation, which is the power plants, and then transmission and distribution, which is the utility. In Rhode Island, that's National Grid. So the generation, there's 31 power plants in Rhode Island. There's a mix of fuels used to create that energy, and then National Grid is responsible for getting it to the end user. And the thing about that is that it's pretty old technology with old infrastructure, and it doesn't take advantage of distributed resources, and that can create reliability issues. So to give an example, Synapse Energy Economics actually did a study on this form that people are required to fill out when there are power outages. Not people, utilities are required to fill out when there are outages, from 2011 to 2016, and they found that 94% of outages are caused by weather-related impacts. And then of those weather-related impacts, they're creating damage to the transmission and distribution. So that's wind knocking out power, ice on the lines. So that's where a microgrid comes in handy, because it's islandable. This is actually last week here in Providence. So with storms getting bigger, more frequent, a microgrid is kind of a timely solution to this problem. How do I get out of this view, because my definition is in the notes. So I just wanted to read this definition for you, or you can read it on the screen behind me. The DOE defines a microgrid as a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources within clearly defined electrical boundaries that acts as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid. A microgrid can connect and disconnect from the grid to enable it to operate in both grid-connected or island mode. So that's kind of where a microgrid would be helpful when we have these outages. Jeannie, did you want to go over a little bit about how it works?
About generally microgrids, yeah. So we were sort of envisioning this event this morning as mostly Q&A. So we're just giving basic overviews. I'll talk a little bit about what makes the model that we're proposing a little bit different. But basically, a microgrid it often includes solar and storage. It could involve other kinds of generation. But it's basically a cluster of facilities that are that have islanding hardware added on to existing wires. So we all share the wires, but the way the wires work, if you have a tree that falls a few miles from you, if you are if you're in the same network, then your power will go off even though that tree isn't anywhere near your house. So to island a set of wires is simply to cut them off from the rest of the grid so the power stops flowing. And so then at that time, and this is you'd only need to do this during emergencies, at that time, all of the power that is used by any of the facilities that are within that islanded area will be powered by the generation and the storage that are within that grid, that smaller section of the grid. So for our model, so that's a typical microgrid, and we might have other slides that kind of show like what's happening at the building level. I think I'll mention at this point though that one of the features that distinguishes our microgrid model that we're proposing from the traditional microgrid is that we're also including the option for virtual microgridding, and that means that buildings that are not contiguous or adjacent to one another can still participate in the microgrid, and the benefits are a little bit harder to envision, but basically a property that's not connected to the same inner grid can still have solar and storage and be connected via the cloud-based software so that they can be optimized along with the other buildings that are in the grid. And that really matters in terms of mostly what we talk about call ancillary services. So things that are of value to the grid, the one that everyone probably thinks of most is peak shaving. So to be able to include sort of a larger area of buildings in a community is an advantage for a few reasons. That could be an advantage to actually revenues that you would get from the utility. But for us, what we're learning through this process is one of the biggest advantages is the social networking. So by connecting communities in a project, communities that might not know that there is a facility in their neighborhood that is going to stay online and powered and a place where they can charge their cell phones or go to an emergency, they may not be able to participate in the islanded portion, but they can participate still in the microgrid. So,
and I should jump in here and say that another feature of the resilient urban neighborhood microgrid design is that we envisioned it for low to moderate income communities. It ties into one of the ideas that we operate on, which is an energy democracy. So we believe that everyone should have a say in where their power comes from. Everyone should have access to clean energy. We find that low and moderate income communities are the most vulnerable, the ones most left behind when there is an emergency. They're frequently communities of color or immigrant communities, and they might not have the resources to evacuate should the need arise. And so that's why we came up with the RUN design for our microgrid.
So that's part of what the feasibility study is going to answer. So we're in the middle of that, but we do have several buildings, including large facilities in Chinatown, that have agreed to go forward with us. So they're not absolutely committed to be part of the project, that they are saying, yes, we're with you, at least as far as the feasibility study goes.
Rooftop solar.
Rooftop solar, yeah, some of these places already have backup generation, which I could talk about now or later, but we're hoping to replace some backup generation with cleaner sources, that if they're on diesel now, we'd like to replace that. But yes, I think we'll get to some of the specific examples. We're also going to ask Alex, I don't know if you're going to come and
We
say
saved your
that,
seat,
but
Alex.
we have one of our community partners, major part of the project, is Green Justice Coalition, and I think you, Alex, we're going to speak to some of the benefits that might be specific to the different locations, or that might be a good time for you to talk.
Just jump in now?
Do you want to?
Sure, yeah.
Can you come closer?
Sure. Can you sit up here? So again, Alex with Clean Water Action. The Green Justice Coalition, this partnership I was describing earlier, we've been thinking about the impacts on the most vulnerable communities. For Larry and some other folks have been working for years, maybe 8 or 10 years now, to think about how do we build campaigns where we get these triple bottom line benefits. Excuse me. There's a lot of development happening, a lot of economic development, and it doesn't always reach our communities. And we find progressive constituencies are often competing with each other when they could be collaborating. So the idea was to build campaigns where everyone can benefit. The environment, labor, and the community, specific communities that have been left out of other economic development opportunities. So we started thinking about microgrids as one potential option maybe 3 or 4 years back, and we met the Run team, which had immense technical expertise and similar, thinking about how this should be driven by communities. So that's really at the heart of this work for us. This is not just a technical solution. We're aware that microgrids people have been talking about this and building them for decades, in isolated communities, Alaska and so on. What's unique about our project is that this is from the ground up. This is driven by the folks who are most vulnerable to climate impacts and other kinds of, social problems that we're, seeing all over our communities: gentrification and high housing costs, displacement, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we benefit these folks who are more vulnerable, and why should we focus on these communities? It's pretty clear that the more well-resourced communities are benefiting from the transition to clean energy, energy efficiency, money that the state has, pulled together, and so on. And the ones who are not benefiting but are still paying into these costs are the low to moderate income communities. So we wanted to make sure that the project, as we built it out, is accountable to these communities. So the solution was, as the Green Justice Coalition has been working for years now, to anchor the projects with community-based organizations that have trust in those communities, that have been there for decades. Some of them, the 2 partners that we work with in Chinatown and Chelsea have been there for 30 and 40 years. And these are folks who, speak the languages in the community, have excellent relationships with the municipality, have lots of trust built up in these communities. So there's, we're not just coming from the outside and, dropping some benefits on folks. It's like, this is something that we're
They're on the ground going to each business and homeowner and asking them if they want to participate, right?
Exactly, and our project design is informed by the interests of the folks in the community. It's not just experts coming in from the outside and bestowing these benefits on the community. It's, what does the community need? There's a long process of getting that information out. So I'm doing a lot of talking, but anyway, the point is the community groups in Chelsea and Chinatown, Green Roots in Chelsea and the Chinese Progressive Association in Boston's Chinatown, are anchoring this project on the Green Justice Coalition side. Clean Water is assisting, and the design is yet to be, as Ginny was just saying, is yet to be finalized, as well as the business model. How is this all going to be financed and paid for, and how do we share the benefits and the costs? How do we share decision making? As the project gets built out, there's a lot in the works here, but it's really something that's flexible and adaptable to each community, and really should be, because we want it to be responsive to the needs of that community. It's a major obstacle. It takes time to just understand how the macrogrid works, right, and use and get familiarity with the language and so on. But that's why these community partners are so essential. There's ongoing conversations happening in both of these communities. First the organizers and the organizations had to learn all this stuff, and there's still ongoing conversations about the benefits and so on. But then that's translating into community meetings. The partners, the subscribers, the members of the microgrid project, the buildings and facilities that would be connected in, are also trying to figure out how does it impact their bottom line and their projected energy costs and so on. But they're approaching this with a trusting relationship because of the trust that's been built up with CPA and Green Roots. And that's, you can't put a dollar amount on that. It's super important. It's really essential.
Well, so there's definitely a strong interest in working with National Grid, and we're here in the Innovation Hub. So are you wondering, does the funding requirement fall to the utility?
Well, ultimately, what you're looking for is like a plan A or a plan B and a plan C to the utility grid.
Right.
And if that's falling to individual businesses or individual residents to build extra solar panels or emergency generators that are over capacity, and it all goes into, they don't have the funds.
Yeah, Larry.
Yeah, if I could, I don't have the exact formula for you, but just to lay it out a little bit. So Rhode Island has pretty good incentives for solar energy. We've got the Renewable Energy Growth Program, we have a net metering program. It's a pretty strong state for solar energy. So that part is probably where you want it to be. On storage, California is playing three-dimensional chess. Massachusetts is probably playing chess. They're putting money into storage. Rhode Island isn't even playing checkers yet. And so that's what, this gets back to that docket I'm talking about, that right now there's a rate case where we're trying to put storage onto the game plan for National Grid and for the state. And so National Grid needs permission and authorization and direction from the state, and it doesn't have that yet.
Right. Well, it's so new in the sense that it's finally becoming economical, that it's so important because the sun isn't shining all the time, the wind isn't blowing all the time, and if we're always going to rely on fossil fuels, then we're stuck. So storage in terms of a microgrid, or storage generally?
In terms of microgrid.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a big thing to say, I'm going to be separated from this grid, that its main function is reliably making the lights go on. So to be able to say that I'm going to have backup power that is going to be there, even if it's only economical now to have it at a low level. We're not saying you could still run all of your processes and do everything when you're in this sort of emergency mode. The storage really makes the difference between being able to do renewables or fossil fuels. That's the simple answer.
Julie had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, just from the perspective of somebody that's trying to put this into a development that we own and manage. So there are great incentives for solar in most locations. And investment tax credits, incentives from the utilities. The way that we're looking at the economics of storage is, like Jen or Jenny mentioned, in terms of shaving peak demand. And a lot of times what happens is the utilities, they know that their peak demand is, it's when people get home from work 5 to 8. And so if you can run your battery during that time, then, and even fill your battery, let's take solar off the table, you fill your battery at night when the energy is cheaper, and then you run it during that peak shavings, then there are some economics in terms of your utility bill going down so that you can cover the cost of the economics of the battery. And then we've looked at every battery type, charging the whole building, charging one floor for community space where there's a kitchen and outlets for people to charge phones. So there's different ways you can deal with the resilient piece. I think what these guys are actually going beyond that, and like if our building had a battery that could, you know, maybe power a portion of our property, it might be large enough that it could also convenience store, shelter, small restaurant that might be within the community that the community would benefit from that, those things being powered.
Just want to add that, yeah, that's right. When the power goes out, you know, the way we design the project is we're focusing on vulnerable residential buildings, you know, low-income households and large multifamily buildings, as well as other institutions in the community that are essential for survival in the event of some sort of problem. So, you know, the peak shaving is really important for those commercial customers because their costs are set by the peak, you know, and if you can lower that cost, you're saving them a huge amount of money. That's one way we can finance this thing. Then there's the resilience benefits, you know, climate, energy resilience, and so on. There's potentially economic opportunities. And just your question, you know, I just want to make sure folks understand that utilities, their business is just to shift power from one place to another. They're not in the business of generation. So the costs don't necessarily fall on them. Maybe somebody has to generate the power separately. You know, it's in the microgrid, you have these large power plants that are fossil fuel largely plants, and it's a separate business. And the utilities, they sometimes have a share in the transmission lines, the big, you know, overhead big steel power lines, but largely their business is the wooden poles and wires on the streets. So they're not in the generation and storage business and such.
I would say that the issue of who controls the storage is one of the things that we're grappling with, and I think it has to do with who is paying and who is welcoming the storage onto their property. So I think it's possible there will be some formula of the customer is allowed to control a portion, but that the utility also has to have access to the storage as well. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah, I
question.
mean, I understand it's a really tricky question. So would you do anticipate there would be kind of an agreement set forth before things start? But you said maybe National Grid wants to turn it on at this point, but the on-site customer has a different goal.
Right. There will be lots of contractual arrangements for so much of this, and they'll all be different. Well, it can be as small as one house. One house could be. It could be 5,000 buildings. So when you asked about Chinatown, we're envisioning that all of Chinatown, Boston, could be in this microgrid. We are facing a really big technological challenge with that, and we're working or talking with Eversource about it. The kind of network that Chinatown is on is an area network, and there are dangers of having power flow both ways. So is it possible that instead of having a full, if our feasibility study determines that we can't start with all of Chinatown, we may start with Tufts Medical Center and a few adjacent buildings, but that is still a win if we can get that kind of implementation in the area network, where right now a lot of projects have just been just been flat out told no, it's not going to happen. So that is a good question.
Excellent point. You know, are folks familiar with the story of stuff? That video talks about the life cycle of products. You know, just stuff that we use every day, and so it begins with extraction. You know, so there's like 5 steps: extraction, production. I don't know, I can't remember. Transportation, you know, and consumption and disposal, something like that. And it's very similar with energy. You're digging this stuff up out of the ground in very dirty ways that, you know, are screwing over some community or, you know, the workers or whoever, shipping it over to the production facility. You're generating power, then you ship it over to the consumption, the population concentration, and then you distribute it, and then, you know, there's no control really from the consumer end or the environment side of how this works. And so just getting folks to understand how the existing system works and how they don't have any say over it is a good place to start, I would say. And then people just automatically, once you start understanding that, it's like, why are we doing this? This is insane. You know what? Like, couldn't we just do this differently? And at every point along that chain, there's ways to do it differently, including in the consumption end, with the time of use rates and all the rate case stuff that's super wonky and, just like, who talks about this stuff? Nobody knows that it's directly impacting your ability to put food on your table, but it is, and some, white guys in suits or whatever, like somewhere are making these decisions for our communities. So just, it's empowering to understand how the system works, and then you start thinking about the technology, and there's real alternatives. The costs are coming down. There's economies of scale happening. I mean, it's things are changing very dramatically. And if you look around the world, the transition is well underway. We're kind of behind a little bit. And we have a chance to do really innovative things in Rhode Island here with this power sector transformation process. But it's going to take the community getting involved and speaking up for its own interests.
And I will just add that we attended a talk yesterday where our partner Greenwood's Chelsea spoke, and they had a meeting. Correct me if I say this incorrectly, but they asked their constituents of all of our projects that we have ongoing right now, which ones are most important to you? And microgrid was overwhelmingly the one that people are most concerned about. And so I think that just speaks to the fact that they are really good community organizers, and they're bringing it up over and over again. And the more people hear about it, the more comfortable they are with the idea. We're developing materials so that they can distribute to their, people that they know. And I think just gradually you gain some momentum that way.
I think one of the key things you touched on was the way it gets this communication going within the community, and that you're working with an established, respected center for that community. And I think a way to look at it in Providence is focusing on the communications, right? So if we put PV panels on the top of the Davy Loeb Center, right, but we didn't have any way to have storage and island at Davy Loeb's Rec Center, people couldn't charge their phones, after an extended outage. So I think one of the things to just focus on is this network of communications, which is like core part of that original concept for Providence's resilient plan, right? Focus on existing centers where you already have the network, but I think explaining it in terms of just the fact you'll be able to charge your phone, you'll be able to come here and get cooled off if you get too hot is one of the ways to just help people understand the benefits of that. Because just the PV panels, if the power goes out, they have to be turned off, right? They can't feed into that building, and they can't feed back into the grid. So I think that's one of the ways to just explain the importance of storage and the ability to island. So it's a combination of solar, okay, in some cases also a small generator, and storage that allows to have balance between the amount of electricity that's being generated and the amount of electricity that's either being used or stored. They have to be balanced or the system can't run, okay? So it's that combination of things that allows you to still have active PV panels, or if necessary, a generator, okay, that doesn't run on gasoline that has to be pumped by electricity, right? And that's where the dual fuel part comes in. And then you'll be able to at least operate this community center.
Thank you. I would add adding to the definition that a microgrid includes a cluster of buildings whose electricity wires can be physically separated from the rest of the surrounding grid, and that by a switch. So it's the same poles and wires, it is just there's added hardware so that it can be islanded in an emergency. So it's not a lot of jobs, but there would be local trained people that you wouldn't have to wait 3 to 23 hours for National Grid to show up. It'd be like there would be local people.
And so at a real high level, it would be like you had a giant island where the existing power plant, the main power plant that everybody uses. And if you could picture a lot of smaller islands and a line connecting all those. And the idea is if that line from the major power plant is severed, that each one of those individual islands, no matter if their lines connected to the other lines were severed or not, could still function as an individual island.
Thanks for the question.
So you're basically replicating this existing macrogrid
On a
on
micro
a micro
scale.
scale. So you need generation, you need some way to get it around with poles and wires, connecting buildings, and you can distribute that depending on their needs. So an essential part of it is the dispatching software, like how you control where the power goes, and then the consumption, like people use it in their home.
For replicating it in a more regenerative way.
Exactly,
Yes.
and it's,
First question on the docket that's before the Public Utilities Commission. They're literally, and we're happy, I think we're probably planning a webinar to try to describe the nuts and bolts of the docket. I would say we're trying to get them to crawl, and they have a proposal that would put a little bit of storage in some locations. They're not really talking microgrid language at all. A couple demonstration projects, like pilots, and to do something like this is really not what's in their frame of mind right now. So we're trying to get them to expand their consciousness a little bit. There's this push-pull right now, just to be real clear. Everyone sees the benefits to some of this stuff. They're also worried. I could tell that National Grid and the Public Utilities Commission people are worried about the impact on ratepayers of not just we've got rates just to run the macro grid. Now we're adding new ideas that have to be paid for in some way. And in our analysis, the benefits will outweigh the cost over time, and so therefore we should be taking the right steps. So that's what this is all about. I would not say that there is project money for something like this anticipated in what was proposed by National Grid. So we're trying to impact that.
We love talking with communities. So how do you work? How do we work? We work for free. No. So basically, we're really tiny, and one of the really genius things about the community model is if there are groups that you know of and you don't know if they have an interest in this, but maybe they have monthly meetings. They've got the community. The way that folks in GGC have been introducing the ideas are really iterative, but maybe the ideas are introduced at one meeting and then the next month there's a little bit more of a discussion. It takes a lot of time, so I feel like existing groups that may already have done some work in energy, whether it's energy efficiency or something else, that you think might be interested in talking with us. So what we do, we just have conversations, find out if there's bandwidth within an organization, because we don't really have funding. When you had the question before, kind of how are we funded, it's about a third of our funding comes from the Massachusetts Utility Bill, because Massachusetts Clean Energy Center sends us awesome interns who do really great work. And now with the funding for feasibility study, that's funding, we get some a lot of individual donation support and a small amount of foundation support. So.
Just to cut to the chase, though, isn't part of this discussion about prospecting for potential pilot sites?
Absolutely. So we're working with Julie's group in Providence and with POA buildings, and we are looking for more connections of groups.
We want our action.
anyone who's not in the room that should be, please feel free to.
Send them our way.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. This is great.
Want applause?
No.